The role of the editor is one of the most well-known, but perhaps least understood responsibilities in the publishing ecosystem. From the outside, some assume that editorial work is focused solely on copy editing and proofreading of manuscript. For others, the editor is a mythic figure responsible for single-handedly producing New York Times bestsellers week after week. The truth is often somewhere in the middle. Our next session dives into the many facets of editorial work, from the essential process of peer review to understanding how and when to modify content for specific audiences. Our next group of speakers will address the realities of freelance labor and investigate the successes and pitfalls of diversity initiatives. Please let me welcome our first panelist, Bailey Harrington. Bailey Harrington is an experienced copy editor, line editor, and proofreader specializing in academic, fiction, and tabletop game editing, in addition to being a recovering academic. Bailey starts off our session with the compelling presentation entitled How to Not Get Exploited as a Freelance Academic Editor. Bailey, you can take it away and feel free to share your screen so that we can all see it here.
My name is Bailey Harrington, and I am a freelance fiction and academic editor, and also now indexer, and a part-time staff member at Washington State University's Writing Center. As they said in my introduction, I'm also a former academic with a background in forensic science and a PhD in human genetics. And I've been working as an academic copy editor since 2015, at which point I was a master's student, and this will become relevant in my talk. I do not have a copy editing certificate, so like no real formal training in that regard. So today I'm going to talk about freelance academic editing, primarily copy editing for academic editing agencies. This can be a flexible source of additional income for academics, including graduate students, that fits around an existing job. So I'll talk about how one becomes a contractor with academic editing agencies, who is able to do so, what that working relationship is like, the kind of compensation that you can get, and how that compares to other sources of similar work, and what to consider to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. So as a note, there are agencies who specialize in book or dissertation editing. I'm going to focus on ones that primarily handle documents like journal articles. So finding work with academic editing agencies, first, you're going to conduct an online search or maybe go to journal websites. Often in their author submission guidelines have information about copy editing services where they'll have links to agencies' websites. Once you've identified an agency that you want to contact, you will look for an email address or contact form for prospective editors. You really just need to send a brief message to them, mentioning your credentials. The details that are relevant there will depend on their recruitment criteria and maybe academic and/or English language requirements. And attaching a CV or a resume may not be possible or required on initial contact, particularly if they're using an online form. Some agencies require graduate degrees or a PhD specifically, though these are not strictly necessary for academic editing or for doing quality academic editing. Experience editing will generally be helpful, though. Some agencies have a limited number of editors, and they may only advertise for specific gaps that they want to fill, like specific subject areas. And these are more likely to showcase their editors on their website. Others maintain a large, more anonymous pool of contractors, and they may do continuous active or passive recruitment through job posts on job boards, or an application form on their website. Many academic editing agencies are based in other countries because people in those countries need English language editing, for example. But these companies tend to hire contractors from all over. So you will almost always be required to complete an editing test. This is common practice in publishing generally, and it's the primary way that your editing and proofreading skills will be assessed. Tests may be paid or unpaid, and each company is going to have their own testing process. There are 4 things that you should keep in mind when doing an editing test. These are compensation, length of the test, turnaround time, and content. Compensation is important because it changes what it is reasonable for you to edit as part of a test. If you're doing a paid test, then working on a longer piece or on unpublished material really isn't a problem as long as you think the compensation is fair. Unpaid tests, however, can very easily be exploitative, and the agencies using those tests may not realize this, or they may not care. The Editorial Freelancers Association has recommendations on the length for unpaid tests, which are no more than 5 standard pages or 1,250 words, and no more than an hour's work. These guidelines, or these are just guidelines, and they're not specifically designed for academic work, but they can still be useful to keep in mind. Turnaround time. If you're not being paid to complete a test, then it's not really reasonable for someone to require you to do it over a weekend or holiday or during time that's inconvenient for you because you have other paid work to do or other plans. And then the content that you're asked to edit in these tests may be real or contrived, published or unpublished. The thing you should keep in mind is that you should never edit a complete unpublished piece for an unpaid test. That is providing free labor to someone. The materials should also be the same for everyone who is applying to be a contractor. Sending different sections of a piece or different chapters to people as an editing test is a relatively common way people try to get free work that is colloquially referred to as a Franken edit. You're probably more likely to encounter that if you're looking for editing work on sites like Fiverr or Upwork, which I would not really recommend. Once you become a contractor with an agency, or once you get approved to be a contractor, what does that look like? So contractors are not employees. There is a legal distinction there that comes into play in several ways. Contractor status generally means that you are not guaranteed a particular volume of work, but you are also not expected to take on a particular volume of work. It should also mean that the hours you put in are not required to be at specific times or add up to a specific number, and the way that you perform the work, the tools that you use, the computer, the software, can't be dictated. Only the form of the end product. So many agencies following the large pool of contractors model use a kind of first come, first served system for distributing jobs. So when something comes in, unless there's a request for a specific editor, they send an email to contractors who edit in the relevant specialty, and then whoever accepts the job first gets it. An obvious downside here is that it can be difficult to pick up work if you check your email infrequently, or if the alerts tend to be sent at a particular time of day, and in your time zone that happens to be in the middle of the night. Another alternative is that an agency might approach an individual editor to ask whether they want to or can take on a particular job, and then allow some time for an answer before approaching someone else. This is more likely to happen in smaller operations. There are also agencies where you set a status saying whether or not you're available for work, and you're then essentially on call and expected to accept work that comes to you. Agency turnarounds can be kind of tight. For some of them, they offer a same-day service. Others, you might have like up to a week. So make sure you know what kind of system they use and whether you'll be able to turn down work if it's inconvenient. Re-edits. So depending on the way the agency works, there may be no contact between the editor and the author. So the editing is usually done in one pass with no author feedback, which affects the way you ask questions and things. Some agencies have editing tiers that allow authors to resubmit work for a re-edit. For example, after they've addressed peer review comments. Re-edits will frequently be offered to the original editor first, and payment for these re-edits is handled differently by many agencies. Some offer editors a higher rate for jobs in these tiers, but then they withhold a portion of the initial rate for the job until after it's been re-edited. They will hopefully have a maximum limit on the window in which the author can resubmit the paper and pay the editor at the end of that window, whether it's been resubmitted or not. Other agencies pay editors a normal fee up front and then have a separate re-edit fee that you get paid to look at portions of the document that have been modified. The volume of work you can get from agencies is highly variable. Factors like the number of contractors an agency has in a given subject area and the amount of work the agency brings in overall will affect how much potential work you can get. None of the academic editing agencies I've contracted for have given me a very high volume of work, so that's more like supplemental income when I do work for them. And then rates. So in my experience, agencies as a whole do not pay super well. This is obviously subjective, so I'm basing it on information about freelance academic editing rates taken from the Editorial Freelancers Association's rates survey and from my own freelance work. Agencies often pay based on word count, and sometimes they use a binning method so that the rate is based on word count ranges, which is kind of weird. So here, got some information, like actual numbers from several agencies. So this chart shows rates per 1,000 words for 7 different agencies. American Journal experts who use a binning method, like I described, and so I've shown max and min values for different word bins. Cactus Communications, Charlesworth Author Services, Editor Bar, Inago, Lex Academic, and MPS Limited. I currently contract for Charlesworth and previously contracted for Editor Bar. The others that are shown here, I've refused to contract for after seeing their terms. There are other places where I've decided not to even apply because they use something like an on-call system, which I don't want to do. But you can see that most agencies use a flat per word rate that comes to between around $9 per 1,000 words for Lex Academic, which is being converted from pounds here to like $26 per 1,000 words. Here, we have information from the EFA rate chart that I mentioned previously, which shows median ranges based on a survey of members. These are not guidelines or rates that are set by the EFA. They're shown per 1,000 words and per hour for different types of editing in both STEM and the humanities. You can see that they're generally significantly higher than the agency rates from the previous page. And finally, these are rates for copy editing for the different agencies that I showed, along with the EFA survey results. Similar survey results from the UK's Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading, although I'll note that these are suggested minimums from the CIEP. Then you have my own freelance rates and the rate for copy editing that I get paid at WSU. So there's a lot of variation here. The lower rates from agencies may be made up for by not having to source the work yourself or deal with the overhead of billing. WSU's rates are lower than my own, but I weigh that against the benefits of university affiliation. So it really comes down to how you value your time and skills. But if someone's requiring you to have a PhD to do work for them, then you really should be compensated accordingly, which is to say, like the highly trained professional that you are. But this is links to the 2 rate charts that I mentioned. And there's maybe time for questions if there are questions.
I feel like I should hold the mic because I don't think any of you can see me in here. Thank you very much. I think I am the only person in this room who is not in academia or scholarly publishing, but that's okay. My presentation is called Protecting Their Innocence, Modifying Mature Content for Young Readers. As John said, I am a professional back of the book indexer. I work with nonfiction books. I've been a member of the American Society for Indexing since 2006, I believe, and I've been on the board for the last 2 years. I work exclusively with trade books, unlike all of you probably, and most of my books are for an adult audience, but once in a while they are for a younger audience. And one of those types of books is what is called a young readers edition. This is generally for between middle grade and young adult, written for ages 10 to 14. And often it's a version of a popular adult title that they've modified. They've modified the content. They obviously are modifying the index. So a 2009 DOJ study found that children's exposure to violence, whether as the victims themselves or even just as witnesses, is often associated with physical, psychological, and emotional harm. They're at a higher risk of engaging in criminal behavior themselves later in life. They're also more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, suffer from depression and anxiety, have difficulty in school. More recently, a 2019 Irish study in the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect looked at the relationship between the age at the time of sexual abuse and the disclosure of the abuse. The researchers found that children were most likely to tell others about the abuse they endured during the developmental period in which they were abused. Considering that, it seems that having age-appropriate discussions with children about difficult topics could be beneficial. The key is, however, making sure these materials are age-appropriate. So how do we do this? How do we modify the text? I think it boils down to 2 things. Use simpler, non-specific phrases and make it relatable to young readers. The first one is basically the what, and the second one I think of as the why. Why should they be learning about this? Is it history? Is it current events? Is it science? Is it something that they should just be aware of? So I'm going to be showing you some examples of indexes I've done and the various themes that they cover. The first is the Me Too movement and the charges against Harvey Weinstein. The second is violence against Native Americans in the 19th and 20th century. The third is an oppositional group that formed to fight against the Hitler Youth in Germany. And the last one is a little bit different. It's about crime scene investigation and forensic science. So the first book is called Chasing the Truth, A Young Journalist's Guide to Investigative Reporting. It's adapted by Ruby Shamir. It's based on the book She Said by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. It was also made into a movie. And the key concepts that this book covers are investigative reporting in general, sexism and sexual harassment, and then very specific accusations against Harvey Weinstein. Now, in the white box is a snippet of my actual index. I removed the page number so it's a little less cluttered looking. But if you take a look at it, you will see that it really doesn't get very graphic. It uses the terms sexism, sexual harassment, some things that relate to Harvey Weinstein in particular, but there is nothing very explicit here. And that's appropriate. It educates young people about issues that they need to deal with and they should be aware of without traumatizing. The next book about violence against Native Americans is called The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Troyer. It's based on The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the present, also written by David Troyer. And this deals with abuse, the forced boarding schools, loss of land, life, culture. You may notice that in the snippet of the index, I use the word Native American, as well as Indian. And that is intentional. As indexers, we do not change the language that the author has chosen to use because they are very intentional about it. So it depends on context. And this is also important for young people to understand. The next book is not a young reader's adaptation. It was written specifically for young people. It's called Flowers in the Gutter, The True Story of the Teenagers Who Resisted the Nazis by K.R. Gaddy. It is about the Edelweiss Pirates. They were a group of teenagers who worked underground to combat the Hitler Youth and the Nazi Party. And it's a nonfiction narrative, so it's a little bit of a different style. You may see in the index that there are some proper names in there, first names, and it's because they're just telling the story. The concepts covered are anti-Semitism, the Nazi Party, violence and torture. It's some really gritty stuff here, but they handle it in a subdued way. And the last one I'm going to show you is called Scene of the Crime, Tracking Down Criminals with Forensic Science by H.P. Newquist. This one is very scientific. It is for young people who probably have a bent towards this as a future career, very much interested in science. I have to warn you, it is kind of gory when you see the index, but it's very honest, and it's the kind of thing that a young person who's interested in science would really thrive. So it deals with blood and forensic evidence, crime scenes, unfortunately, human decomposition. But it's very no nonsense, unbiased, and young people can find what they're looking for without really making a judgment about it. So I'll move us off this page so we don't have to look at that anymore. So what's the bottom line here? Maturity and age are definitely factors to consider when approaching sensitive subjects. But not all 12-year-olds can handle adult topics, nor should they. It's my feeling that simplified, unbiased language, generally without a lot of unnecessary detail, can educate young people without traumatizing them. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions here.
Hello, can you hear me? We're Kelsea and Liliann, the co-founder and publicity representative for Stir Stories. Today we'll be presenting authenticity as an ethos, why diversity alone won't build integrity.
Can you guys hear me without the mic? Okay, no, we don't have to pass it. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, lots.
All right. I have carrot. Testing, okay. So the publishing industry has a diversity problem. Essentially, there is none. And where diversity does exist, equity is lacking. Today, we'll ground this unfortunate reality in industry data and themes and present Stir Stories, our company, as a more equitable and authentic alternative to how things are typically done in publishing. I'm sure if you can keep in mind.
Yes. Some context to be mindful as we present. The industry data presented is in reference to publishing in North America, and our internal data is self-assessed as of 2023.
Finally, we're focusing on DEI from a racial and ethnic lens, so we're not accounting for diversity in other realms like religion or gender, for example. With that, let's get started. All right, so in 2015, Liliann Books introduced the Diversity Baseline Survey. This was the first quantitative measure of industry diversity overall. Since 2015, it's become really well recognized, and we'll continue to reference it throughout this presentation. The 2015 results at a glance show an industry that is 79% white overall, 82% white in the editorial departments, and 86% white at the executive levels. And Liliann Books noted during this inaugural survey that just 3 of the big 5 publishing houses participated in their request for diversity data.
And then in 2019, the Diversity Baseline Survey 2.0 was released, reporting that the industry was 76% white overall, 85% white at the editorial level, and then 78% white at the executive.
So some key insights to be mindful of here are that the editorial departments are actually more white than they were 4 years prior in 2015. And then Liliann also offered a disclaimer for this set of data that the seemingly overall positive trend in diversity is actually statistically insignificant given the difference in sample size from 2015 to 2019. Finally, it's worth noting that while the executive departments are more diverse overall, 4 of the big 5 publishing houses at the time were run by white men.
The Cooperative Children's Book Center diversity statistics also gained notoriety in 2019, thanks to the graphic that's displayed here from 2018. The diversity assessment run out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison documents children's and YA books by and about Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. And then a key finding from the data released in 2019 is that 31% of children's and YA books that they inventoried include BIPOC as main characters, versus the 71% of the children's and YA books that included a white person, an animal, or an inanimate object as a main character. Additionally, the stats don't sum exactly to 100, and that's because due to the CCBC methodology, which accounts for multiracial identities in both categories.
So what we see with the CCBC and the Liliann books data combined is an industry that isn't diverse and frankly doesn't care to be. In 2015, with the launch of the Diversity Baseline Survey, the publishing industry was directly confronted with the reality that the books and the book professionals prioritize don't reflect actual societal diversity. To contextualize this a little bit, census data at the time for the United States showed that the population was 13% Black, but only 10% of the books represented in the CCBC data included protagonists from Black backgrounds. And obviously there are more BIPOC humans than inanimate objects in the human population. So looking at the data 4 years later in 2019, it's as if the industry looked at the results and said, oh, well. And that brings us to 2020.
Following the murder of George Floyd, calls for racial and social justice swept across many industries in 2020, including publishing. Some highlights of this phenomenon look like the hashtag Publishing Feed Me campaign, which revealed the concerning disparities between white authors and authors from racially diverse backgrounds. For example, Mandy Len Patchen, as a self-proclaimed totally unknown white woman with one viral article, received $400,000 from her book deal, which is more than double than what award-winning Black author Roxane Gay received for her highest advance at the time. Secondly, Jesmyn Ward, a Black author and the first woman to win 2 national book awards for fiction, said that she had to wrestle her way for a $100,000 advance. Finally, N.K. Jemisin, who is Black and the only other person to win 3 Hugo Awards in a row for her Broken Earth trilogy, got an advance of $25,000 each for each volume of her series. Her follow-up trilogy, Great Cities, netted her an advance of $60,000 per volume.
2020 also saw an industry-wide day of solidarity to protest racial injustice in and outside of the publishing industry. 1,300 publishing professionals participated in this day using language. We protest our industry's role in systemic racism, and we protest the pursuit of profit through books that incite racism. As BIPOC and allies, we set this day aside. Being called out so publicly and by folks of prominence, the Big Five released statements in which they committed to building more diverse workplaces and to publishing more diverse books. For example, the Hachette CEO at the time said, quote, "It's really moving to see colleagues putting themselves on the line to bring necessary change to our industry. Their concerns are real, and they're correct that we have moved much too slowly." Similarly, a Penguin Random House exec said in a letter to employees that, quote, "We've taken time to reflect and listen to further identify how we can affect meaningful, lasting change." So essentially in 2020, the publishing industry once again had an opportunity to confront its abysmal DEI record, this time with a PR incentive to do so.
And what were the present day results? The 2023 Diversity Baseline Survey by Liliann Books reported that the industry was still 72% white overall, 71% white at the editorial level, and 76% white at the executive. It's important to note that 4 of the Big Five executives who control 80% of the market are white. And as of in 2023 CCBC diversity, the statistics were 40% of the books they had received had a BIPOC main character, which is a very minimal increase from 2022, which was 39%.
So 2015 to date, to kind of put this all together, over the course of about 10 years, we've seen an initial apathy when it comes to diversity and equity in publishing. Then we saw a sudden investment in improving this data based on, the world watching and a PR crisis essentially. And then now present day, we essentially see no significant results to back up the commitments that the industry has made over the last 9 to 10 years. Yes, the industry is presently more diverse, but barely. And for change to be noteworthy, it has to be meaningful. Assuming meaningful change means significant positive impact over a timely manner, the industry has proven that it's not going to change itself in meaningful ways. In our observation, when diversity pushes are misguided and inauthentic in manner, change will be slow and unimpressive. It's our conclusion that it's time to fund a new approach to establish a truly diverse and equitable reality in publishing, and we're happy to present one such model.
So here at STIR, we offer an approach that prioritizes diversity and equity as its founding pillars. This approach involves a 3-step process. 1, we're signing authors from marginalized communities. 2, we're hiring an editor and illustrator who come from the same background or to have the same shared lived experience as the author, so that all the contributors for the book can tell the story with authority. And as mentioned in our presentation title, authenticity is our ethos. And 3, we publish it.
So what are the results of this approach? Well, firstly, we're proud to say that 75% of our core team, which includes Liliann and myself, are BIPOC. And as you can see here on the slide, our catalog is quite diverse as well. Just to reiterate, when it comes to our catalog, this data is relevant as of 2023, and this data is self-assessed. But you'll see that we offer a more balanced, diverse approach to storytelling in the industry overall when you're accounting for those CCBC statistics we presented earlier. We don't claim to have all the answers, and in fact, we plan to build on the diversity of books we've published so far. We also want to acknowledge that there are other diversity-minded indie publishing houses, such as Liliann Low Books, who provided the diversity baseline data that we've shared previously in this presentation. But all that to say, we're proud of the work we've done, and as the data shows, there's certainly additional work to be done to create more integrity in publishing. And with that, we say onward.
Thank you all for listening.
All right, hello, everybody. I appreciate you waiting until the end of the day and sticking around to hear me speak. I know it's been a long day. I really appreciate actually getting to go at the end, even though it was very nerve-wracking all day. Listening to everybody speak, because I do feel like there are a lot of intricacies that everybody spoke about that do essentially tie into what I'm going to talk about today. So the title of my presentation is Redefining the Culture and Future of Peer Review through community-centered practices and their impact on open access and diverse submissions. I'll essentially be talking about what I've accomplished over the past 2 years being in the MPS publishing program at GW, while simultaneously working as an English teacher in high school classrooms with 11th and 12th grade students who are accessing academic content for the first time. And just basically what I noticed in terms of the gap in their ability to access the content, despite the fact that they are one of our primary audience members. Great. This is the same introduction that John already gave me, so I won't go over it too extensively. I currently work as a professional writing specialist at Rhode Island College, recently relocated to Providence, Rhode Island. And I've also been doing a bit of freelance work in the area with local magazines, and just still exploring the publishing industry through this program. All right, I actually really appreciate session before me for so directly speaking about the issues of diversity in publishing and just asserting that the current approach is really insufficient and underdeveloped. While it is great to collect demographic data and have recruitment goals and DEI plans and provide trainings, we're really missing an essential problem that is contributing to the overall issue of diversity in academic publishing specifically, but also publishing overall. I think that this quote from the 2023 workplace equity survey really eloquently explains the gap that it still remains in the industry, even though there is so much energy being put towards D&I initiatives. So this respondent, who's Latina, says, I believe that mentorship is critical for those of us that come from working class and non-white backgrounds like myself to gain access to work in scholarly publishing. It became clear to me through college, including during my internship with a scholarly publisher, that certain career paths require insider knowledge and guidance that I simply did not have. I am so grateful to my professors, supervisors at my college library job, and internship supervisor who were so willing to give me such knowledge and guidance. You don't know how to pursue something you know nothing about. I think it is the responsibility of those within the industry to branch outward and provide support to those outside of it. And so I think that this really nicely speaks to the issues that a lot of minority students struggle with when entering an academic industry, academia at large, and also the academic publishing industry, which are essentially superimposed on top of each other. So when we are talking about why is academia at large not more diverse, well, it's essentially there is inequity in our public school system that is resulting in a lack of diversity in academia as well as academic publishing. And while it is great that we have these initiatives, they are largely focusing on people who are already in the industry or at the very minimum entering their undergraduate degrees. And the issue of public education inequity starts far, far, far beyond that. I will be focusing on this text, Voices of the Self, a study of language competence by Keith Gilliard. This was published in 1991 by Wayne State University Press. And there's plenty of other research in educational equity that has reflected these same ideas. I just really like this particular text because it focuses on linguistics, which is something that is very subconscious and very much permeates through all of our lives and experiences as we interact with one another. The two main ideas that I wanted to pull out of this text was one, underserved students typically fall behind academically by the end of the third grade because they have found academic pursuit unfulfilling and have begun to retreat from the process, first of all. And secondly, school identifies those who can accept a strict routinizing of their lives, points out those who can be expected to perform, and most importantly, those who are slated to live lower class lives are conditioned to accept their fate and how to function in their prescribed roles. So many minority students have already lost faith in their ability to attend undergraduate institutions by the time they reached my classroom in 11th and 12th grade, and we're looking at academic content for the first time. They in no way saw themselves reflected in their databases that they were exploring. They couldn't really comprehend the concepts or content. And so no, none of them were even vaguely considering a career in academic publishing because they just didn't see themselves in it. And so essentially what I'll be talking about for the rest of my presentation is how I've gone about addressing this with the idea of educational equity really in mind. So how can university presses and scholarly publishing industry at large promote diversity in academia and combat the effects of an inequitable public education system? And so that is where Black Stripe comes into play, which is the publishing venture that I've been working on over the past couple of years. And I will basically talk about how I used this specific model to receive grant funding and how I put that funding back into the community in a way that also supported the GW Journal of Ethics and Publishing financially. So first, just naturally by attending this program and by working as an English teacher, I was cultivating partnerships with universities, organizations, et cetera. And so the main three organizations that I worked for this was an event that I hosted in June of 2024. So the main organizations I worked with was the GW Journal of Ethics and Publishing, the Howard County Public School System, which is where I was employed, and We Need Diverse Books, which is a really amazing nonprofit based in Bethesda, Maryland. If you don't know about them, you should definitely check them out because they're doing some really amazing things. So I cultivated these partnerships, and then based on these partnerships, I went and pursued grant opportunities. So I researched grant opportunities through government agencies, nonprofits, and considered how the network that I had already established would allow me to meet the specifications of the grants. And so I'll describe briefly some of the different funding that I received and how I changed my perspective to meet the specifications. So the first partner was the local Children's Board of Howard County. They were specifically looking to fund enrichment activities for LGBTQ+ students. And so I was sponsoring GSA at my high school at the time. And so I was very tapped into that community and figured that would be something that we could strive for. Next was We Need Diverse Books. They were looking to connect racially diverse students with author signing opportunities. And so I was able to have an author come to this event and participate in an author signing, although it was also meeting this other specification for a completely different grant. And then lastly was the Maryland State Arts Council, which was connecting students with arts opportunities. So I funded 4 different competitions. One was essay writing, poetry writing, a magazine cover design contest, and a poster board contest. And so students in grades 7 through 12 were able to submit work to all of those sections, and the winners from each of those sections will actually be published in an upcoming issue of the GW Journal of Ethics in Publishing, and they will be able to engage with the peer review process in a very meaningful way that will demystify it for them, hopefully, and allow them to actually see themselves and not be so intimidated by academia or academic publishing. And then lastly, I developed the publication, which I kind of already skipped to that part. But I hosted the event. We had all of our students come out. It was really lovely. The author signing was with our Eric Thomas, who has written a couple of really amazing both nonfiction and fiction books aimed at different age groups. I also had a career fair panel where some of our representatives were PhD candidates, some of them were registered behavioral technicians, some of them were consultants. I myself was up there as well. So my students got to see a really large range of careers, and also people who were engaging with academia, and just the ways that they navigated that as people of color, as people who are queer, and don't always meet the societal norms that people expect them to when they enter this space. So what were some of the benefits that I found through this model? First, university presses and scholarly publishing organizations become actual active participants in the essential reformation of our public school system. So as opposed to simply collecting data and hoping that the numbers are going to get better, we are actually in the schools working with students and encouraging them to go get higher degrees so that when we do want to appoint members on editorial boards, they are part of the organizations that they need to be a part of. Because it's kind of impossible to address the issue of diversity in academic publishing without addressing inequity in public schools. Second, academic presses authentically open themselves up to a more diverse body of submissions. I think a very common issue right now in academic publishing is imposter syndrome across the board, and getting authors to want to submit their work. I would say that's probably way more intense for authors of color, queer authors, or anybody else that feels that they don't really belong. When you authentically open yourself up and expose yourself to their community, as opposed to begging them to come to you, they actually cultivate trust in a community that may actually be willing to look at their work and see them as valuable scholars, which is really helpful. And then lastly, I'm particularly looking at small university presses and student-run presses. I know there is a lot of grant funding out there for larger presses to have open access models, but small student-run presses typically don't have access to those like $1 million grants. So a $500 grant opportunity or a $1,000 grant opportunity can be really valuable to a journal with no money. So it allows them to access those funding opportunities and to state an open access model. So we're not only working to diversify the industry on a very intimate level, but we're also benefiting the industry at large by publishing open access content. This is just kind of what I envision for the future in terms of how I want to continue to grow this nonprofit Black Stripe. I want our main priority to be outreach, and as we continue to grow awareness and get different grant funding opportunities, I will be able to build an internal staff and have manufacturing and actual print publications and have our own peer review team of racially representative individuals. So I also do want to emphasize that although I did mainly talk about race in this presentation as my measure for diversity, it is really important to me to look at intersectionality and the ways that being both Black and female impact an individual's experience in academia and in the world in general. And so that's something that I would love to look at more intentionally in the future. So thank you all for listening to me speak. If you want to contact me, you can email me there. I unfortunately do not live in the DC area anymore, but I would love to come back and see my family and stuff. So please feel free to reach out to me and we can arrange time to meet up, and I'll take your questions after this as well.
We have something, a really important comment joining us from the online chat. This is from Cami, saying not so much a question, but an observation that the presentation, and this is to our opening presentation, about modifying content for younger readers, or rather Amy's presentation, could also be relevant for creating layperson summaries or making scientific content for younger readers more accessible to non-experts to increase trust in science, which has also been a really relevant topic in the last several years about really engaging our scientific material to folks who may not have the vocabulary to really engage with it. So I wanted to share that comment. We don't have any further questions coming through here. Do we have anything?
We have a couple here.
All right, perfect.
My question is also for Amy. I love indexing too. So my question is, I'm not super familiar with exactly then what your job description would entail. Do you ever work in like BISAC codes and keyword development? Do you do anything that to help like publishers and editors get better at doing that? Because clearly you're very good at being able to pull out that information. Like, is there anything out there that helps editors do better at keyword and BISAC sort of choices?
Here.
No one get ourselves. That's a very good question. Thank you. I do not personally, but there are indexers who work in scholarly indexing and abstracting and taxonomies and such keywords, things like that. And they would know how to do that. So it does fall on the index sometimes. But it's not what I'm doing.
We have a couple some questions.
You can grab the second mic if you want. John.
First, I want to say that thank you to Dr. G, who has been like really emphasizing the importance of like translation, especially with languages that are in privileged and like publishing law, like patient Creole, patois, that's so important. So I want to like emphasize that even more. My question actually kind of goes to Mikayla, but really to like wider like audiences, like how do we strive to look at intersectionality in our publishing? You know, we had a previous like presentation that kind of separated race and gender, but we know that everyone has all of those things within them. So kind of how has the process been to uplift, you know, race and gender, disability and gender, all of those intersectionalities that sometimes get lost when we put things into boxes that actually represent reality.
Did you hear the question?
Thank you.
I think that's been a really big challenge for me as a researcher, trying to find data that is reflective of intersectional identities. I think the approach that Certain Stories was talking about in terms of having copy editors and illustrators that actually identify with the content, working on it is a really good way to be more authentic of somebody's more complex identities and the ways that they intertwine, because it's kind of a lived experience. That's the best way to reflect that experience, is to get it from person to legit. Is very difficult to quantify, especially when you start talking about things like sexual orientation and gender identity. I think something else that I've done in the past in previous presentations with this initiative is demonstrating how the marketplace grows when you are talking about intersectional populations. So I'm not just talking about the Black population, but I'm talking about Black women, which means I'm relating to a larger population of people, whether you identify with one or both of those categories. So that's one approach I've taken, just to kind of pique an interest in the topic. I would love for other researchers in like sociology to research it more explicitly so that I can take that information and do things with it.
I'll just add that the Liliann data we presented is much more comprehensive than the excerpts we pulled. So I can't recall exactly how much intersectional data is there, but they do go into a plethora of other categories around today. So maybe just checking out what they have as well.
And it would be a good topic for research. All right, we have another question in the back.
I also navigate between different dialects, very with Indigenous and even French. My question, so it may have come off in translation. I heard a lot about diversity from doing certain stories. So my question I'll start with is, if diversity alone won't build integrity in publishing, what will? So for example, my existence as an Indigenous person, as a multi-ethnic, as a racial person, won't make me, a person of integrity, so I know that's how I move, so how can we move in these spaces? And just really a quick quip, I was at a conference yesterday, and a gentleman with a, political, nonpartisan, publishing platform. He was giving an example of how he's pro-choice, but when he writes a piece on, abortion and that sort of thing, he gets his pro-life writer to kind of like edit it, so that kind of like different perspectives, that diversity in perspective, I think that that's the accountability. But, my question is, how do we know that, integrity in publishing?
Yeah, thanks for asking to clarify. So on our end, that means not just diversity, that is a huge part of the question, but the second part to that is how are you approaching it, right? So are you only hiring a handful of diverse staffers, whatever that loosely means, because it'll look bad otherwise, or are you hiring diverse staffers? Kind of what you were saying in your presentation, like through a pipeline, right? Through a very deliberate pipeline to kind of create the equitable hires as well. So is it proportionate to society as a whole? Is their pay scale proportionate to the pay scale of other folks who don't come from as diverse backgrounds? And then are you actually valuing the input they have, or again, are they just a box being checked? So diversity is a huge part of the integrity question, but that's not just enough to say, oh, we have our diversity numbers up. It's like, how are you going about doing that? And which positions of the industry are these diversity numbers higher than they were previously? I don't know if that answered your question. That's just our take on it. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Katie?
I was curious for Kelsea and Liliann about the tools and the avenues that you guys have found success in when you're attempting to either solicit proposal or just encouraging submissions, how you guys have found, or I guess what's been most fruitful for you guys to pursue?
For author submissions in particular, or?
For both author and editors, and making sure that there's compatibility or at least alignment in the background.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in terms of author submissions, since we've found it, we actually haven't had to do much to query authors. I think by the nature of our mission and how committed we are to it, folks who get it naturally gravitate towards us, right? Like what we found is that authors and editors and illustrators who end up working with us, they're so relieved and excited by our approach that they're quick to spread the word in similar diverse or like differently diverse communities. So for authors, we actually haven't done too much outreach since our founding. For editors and illustrators, we are very intentional about looking in spaces where you typically might not see them. Again, to your point, a lot of the folks who could contribute to our work with authenticity don't show up in the traditional spaces because they've been marginalized from them, right? So we go to universities, we actually look for students who might typically not be asked to participate in editing or illustrating processes. And then from there, a lot of it is like word of mouth, right? We just do the research that I think a lot of folks in the industry are too lazy to do, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna put like an open call on our website, like reach out to us, and wanna work with us, right? Like, well, again, kind of the points that we've heard again and again today. It's like, well, people who know to reach out are the people who know to reach out, and why do they know how to find a publisher's website? So we actually just do a lot of our own research as well, source illustrators and editors would be the right fit for our books. Do you want to add anything?
Okay, we have time for another question, or maybe two, anybody else? So, Puja is gonna say a few closing remarks, and, but before that, let me give you the address, for Tonic at Quigley's. We're gonna have a social hour. It's on the corner of G Street and 21st Street. And I just want to point out that our program, we will buy some appetizers, so we'll pay for some food over there. Drinks are gonna be on your own, so I just want to make that clear to everybody. No alcohol or other drinks, but we will get some appetizers. So, thanks, Puja, for everything today, and turn it over to you.
I chose to prepare a written statement for closing remarks because I wanted to speak from my heart, and my heart has a tendency to babble when left unsupervised. For 5 years now, John and I have partnered to revive and nurture this humble little conference, and we have benefited from the considerable assistance and support of the GW College of Professional Studies, its staff, students, and alumni. In those 5 years, it has become an essential part of the Masters in Publishing program and a central event for the broader publishing community here in DC and abroad. We have welcomed speakers from all over the world. Speakers who first joined as presenters and have joined the program as enthusiastic faculty. I don't know if ZM's still here, but that's addressed to her. Students who have shared their capstone projects and deepened their careers through work on the Journal of Ethics in Publishing, and Randy's here, and I wanted to shout out him for his work on the journal. Where you have experienced problems in your respective fields, you not only pursued solutions, but you are generously sharing your results. All of you, attending online and in person, bring your energy, skills, frustrations, and humor to the many challenges we collectively face as publishing professionals. This year, we received a record number of outstanding presentations. We did our best to coordinate complementary viewpoints and develop space for complicated topics to receive the benefit of a variety of voices and perspectives. We did some matchmaking. We asked students to step into new roles, and we volunteered, or voluntold, as my boss says, our colleagues to moderate subjects they were uniquely qualified to speak to. This conference occupies a huge chunk of my psychic real estate, and every single year, I find the experience to be therapeutic, invigorating, and reassuring. We, you, are an extraordinary community of experts, and you demonstrate the essential quality of skepticism, thank you, Christopher, in balance with the willingness to innovate enthusiastically. It inspires me. It motivates us to continue working together and to keep sharing ideas. This little conference that could has become one of my proudest moments every year. Thank you for the energy and interest that you bring to the event, for thoughtfully listening, and for your desire to be heard. And thank you, John, for the opportunity. Now let's go get some drinks. But before we get some drinks, again, when you exit this building, hang a right, walk till 21st Street, hang another right. When you get to the corner of G, stop. Before we do all that, day 2 of our conference continues on Zoom, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Please do join us and be part of the ongoing conversation. Thank you. Good night.